Welcome back to Inside the System. I'm Jasmine Logan, and I'm joined by Emeritus Political Science Professor Dr. David Kernervo. Today we'll be covering the most recent media coverage in American politics, including the looming threat of a government shutdown, updates on the Texas border, and the future of healthcare in Georgia. So stay tuned. First on the agenda today is the most recent threat of a government shutdown. Last week, Congress was scrambling to pass funding packages to avoid a shutdown. Let's hear from Julia Benbrook on the subject.
House Speaker Mike Johnson needed to once again rely on votes from Democrats in order to get this funding package approved, frustrating some of the far-right members of his party. This led Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene to threaten Johnson's job. She actually filed a motion to vacate. This is the same process that Republicans used to oust former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy back in October.
Lawmakers on Capitol Hill spent Friday scrambling to pass a $1.2 trillion government funding package before midnight. It includes funding for a number of critical government operations, including the Departments of Defense, Homeland Security, Labor, Health and Human Services, Education, State, and the legislative branch.
There's good and there's bad. It's a bipartisan compromise.
We don't want a government shutdown. We're going to vote for this thing, even if it's not perfect.
The House did pass the package Friday just before noon with bipartisan support, fast-tracking the funding bill in hopes of avoiding a partial shutdown. Anger over the passage creating chaos within the Republican Party and leading Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene to file a surprise motion to oust GOP House Speaker Mike Johnson.
We need a new speaker. This is not personal against Mike Johnson.
Greene did not provide a timeline for next steps. On the funding package, it's still unclear if the Senate will be able to get the bill across the finish line in time. This last-minute sprint has become familiar on Capitol Hill, frustrating lawmakers on both sides of the aisle.
We're still working on last year's appropriation bills while we're trying to start on this year's appropriation bills that are supposed to be done in October. It's a terrible thing to do. There's no excuse for it.
All of this takes place in the middle of a heated election year when Congress has struggled to pass meaningful legislation.
If a temporary lapse in funding does occur, but the Senate is able to pass the package over the weekend, it would likely have a limited impact on government operations. Reporting at the Capitol, I'm Julia Benbrook.
So Dr. Kernervo, what would be the potential consequences of a government shutdown?
Well, of course, a total government shutdown would be very consequential for a lot of people in society. It would mean that services, most of the services, those except for emergency services of the federal government, would be closed. The workers would not get paychecks. Citizens who get Social Security checks would not receive those checks. And so it would be very inconvenient, needless to say, for lots and lots of people. Now, one of the things that has happened in the last year or so is that the current speaker has tried to break down the budget so that only part of the government would shut down at a time. This portion that would have shut down would have been national defense, the Homeland Security portion, and so those are pretty consequential activities of government, needless to say. So that would have been very inconvenient for lots of people in society and in the government itself.
Definitely. It seems like in recent years especially, we're at risk of a government shutdown more and more. Why is that?
They have been appearing more and more over the last several years. And one of the reasons, I think, is the divisions which occur within the federal government. The party divisions, as we know, have become much more strident. They have become more frequent. And when Republicans and Democrats can't work together, as they at least used to some extent in the last decade, 2 decades ago, then what we find is that they're willing to take chances, they're willing to not compromise, they're willing to say it's going to be our way or else. And so what we find then is that the government and the citizenry are thrown into turmoil as we worry about what's going to happen with these deadlines that keep reappearing every month or 2 months or 6 months, depending on what the emergency bill is that's been passed.
I see what you mean. You mentioned a word that I thought was interesting, compromise. A lot of the conflict regarding whether moving forward with the funds to avoid the shutdown is for the bipartisan agreement. Especially the Republicans in Congress were pushing for stricter immigration. That was just something that they weren't willing to let go for this deadline. But, you know, thankfully, they were able to come to some sort of compromise, and we were able to avoid this shutdown. Congress passed the funding bill just in the nick of time. Let's hear from some of our politicians on the issue. Robert Kirkpatrick reports.
Just 2 hours after the midnight deadline, Congress passed a funding bill to avoid a government shutdown.
This funding agreement between the White House and congressional leaders is good news that comes in the nick of time. When passed, it will extinguish any more shutdown threats for the rest of the fiscal year.
President Joe Biden signed the legislation Saturday and praised the bipartisan bill, calling it, quote, good news for the American people. The $1.2 trillion funding bill addresses a slate of critical government operations, including the Departments of Defense, Homeland Security, Labor, and the legislative branch.
This is a good result for the American people in terms of standing up for their health, their safety, their education, their national security protection, and of course, above all else, their economic well-being.
But the fight is far from over, as hardline conservatives signaled an unwillingness to approve the legislation.
It's a bad day for the country, for anybody that votes for this. The funding that's killing this country.
The agreement could also cost Republican Mike Johnson his job as House Speaker. Georgia Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene on Friday filed a motion to vacate him as House Speaker.
I filed the motion to vacate today, but it's more of a warning and a pink slip. This was our leverage. This is our chance to secure the border, and he didn't do it.
Greene's resolution to oust Johnson will hang over the GOP conference as the House begins a 2-week recess. I'm Rob Kirkpatrick reporting.
In the wake of the shutdown being avoided, Marjorie Taylor Greene has filed a motion to dismiss House Speaker Mike Johnson. What kind of complications could this have for Congress moving forward?
Well, of course, what we saw last fall when the previous speaker was dismissed, the office vacated, it meant that the majority party, the Republicans, had the responsibility of trying to fill that speaker position. And as we know, it took them several weeks to do that. And during that time, of course, the business of the House of Representatives and the Congress more generally was literally brought to a standstill. And so it created a lot of turmoil, a lot of heartache in terms of not being able to get things passed, not being able to do the business of the people. And so we're faced with the possibility of that happening once again right before an election. And so what we see, if someone doesn't come along to save Speaker Williams, is that we're going to find the office vacated and again a longer perhaps period of turmoil. Now, of course, what we do know is that apparently the Democrats have offered to help save the speaker. The handful of Republicans who are pushing the vacating of the speakership are very upset because of the compromise that did occur. They did not want to compromise. They wanted all or nothing of what they were demanding. The speaker didn't give them that, and so this led to the push by Georgia's Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yeah, so Democrats are currently more willing to work with House Speaker Mike Johnson than his Republican Party is.
That's right. Speaker Johnson is someone who most Democrats don't particularly appreciate either because of his very conservative views. But I think he saw the reality, and the Democrats are seeing the reality that if Mike Johnson is kicked out of office, that we're going to enter a period, probably a longer period than we had last time, of not getting anything done. And so the Democrats have offered to help save Johnson by voting for him for Speaker rather than their own candidate if he's willing to do certain things. And of course, the requirement that the Democrats are setting up is that he provide a pathway for financial aid to be given to Ukraine.
Interesting. So that's the compromise for them, funding Ukraine.
Right.
Which makes sense. That is something that the Democratic Party and President Biden has been pushing for, support for Ukraine. Well, I'm interested to see how that plays out and if House Speaker Mike Johnson will be moving forward or if they are really trying to vacate his position. We'll be right back after this short break to catch you up on what's happening in Texas.
After you joined our family, it was like, I really do feel complete now.
You're not going to get it all right. Just make sure you nail the big stuff, like making sure your kids are in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right at nhtsa.gov/the-right-seat.
Hey, Bobo, do trees tell each other stories?
I'm sorry. I'm afraid I don't know that.
Hey, why don't we go find out? Listen.
Last week in Texas, there was an incident at the border. A group of immigrants rushed both the border and the guards, tearing down a wire fence with them. Let's take a look at some footage from the scene. CNN's Ed Lavandera reports.
This happened just a few hours ago here on the eastern side of El Paso, and you can see behind me the large border wall, and beyond it several hundred more yards before you get to the Rio Grande. And beyond that, which you really can't see from this vantage point, is another long line of chain link fence and razor wire that has been put in place by Texas National Guard soldiers over the last several months. And what happened several hours ago is that we were told by CBP officials that there were several hundred migrants that essentially overwhelmed a number of Texas National Guard soldiers that were there. We're also told that, and we witnessed this when we arrived here at the scene, all of these migrants were then taken into Border Patrol custody, and they are right now in the process of being processed by Border Patrol. They were put on buses. What we saw is mostly a massive group of young men, also women and children, part of this group as well. And all of this, we should be very clear, is we're not exactly sure what instigated this or what sparked this particular tension to arise at this moment. We were told by Border Patrol officials here in this region that there hasn't been any kind of sign of rising tensions between migrants and Border Patrol officials and National Guard soldiers over the last few days leading up to this. So the circumstances of what led to it and what sparked all of this is unclear at this moment.
How could this incident affect public opinion about border control?
Well, I think it could very well have a major impact on public opinion. Having immigrants rush the border the way they did, demanding entrance into the United States, really is unprecedented, it seems to me. We've had small groups of people coming to the border, sneaking in or being let in by coyotes, so to speak, but at the same time having this kind of huge mass of people rush the border demanding entrance really is something quite unusual. And so people are already upset about the number of illegal immigrants who have come to the border, and this just exacerbates the problem, and it's going to make public opinion, I think, turn that much more negative. And it's going to turn more negative, I'm afraid, against the president. I mean, he's the one who has not acted as Trump did to close the border. And so the result is that people are going to see it as, at least to a certain degree, Biden's fault. We know from public opinion polls that people already see Biden fairly negatively, partially because of the border incidents and the immigration problem. And so this is something we've got to deal with. I mean, we deal with it as quickly as we can to try to get some sort of control over the border.
That's a very interesting point that you brought up. A situation like this could negatively affect President Biden as he's moving towards re-election.
That's right. The polls all show that immigration is one of the two major issues, along with the economy, that are affecting the way people are looking at the Biden administration and their voting choices for the fall. So something needs to be done to try to get a handle on this problem and present the people with some sort of a possible solution.
Definitely. Border control and immigration is certainly a hot topic issue in the U.S. Do you have any sort of insight on why it is such a divisive issue?
Well, we've had traditionally at least a certain group of people in this country who are what we call nativists, in the sense that they're anti-immigrant. They want the United States for those people who are already here, and if people are going to come into this country, they want them to come in legally through the established process of filing all the papers and doing all the other things that are necessary for legal citizenship from outside. And so the fact that we have these immigrants coming in illegally makes people upset. They worry about the costs to the country in terms of educational costs, possible welfare costs, and so on. What a lot of people don't understand is that people who do come in illegally, who don't have a Social Security number, who don't have documentation of any kind, really don't get the kinds of welfare benefits that people think they're getting.
Very true.
And so it's a false assumption on the part of many that they're costing us a great deal of particular welfare money, because they're not. They're getting some benefits in terms of education once they settle somewhere. They are perhaps getting some medical care because hospitals are required to treat people who are ill, who come to their doors. At the same time, though, what we call traditional welfare, like food stamps and those sorts of things, are not being received by these immigrants. The best way they can survive is for them to get jobs. And that has to be the way perhaps for them to come in and for us to take care of them through employment.
Definitely. Texas specifically, being a conservative state, is pushing for stricter border control in terms of immigration, and Texas has recently been trying to pass new legislation regarding border control. Governor Greg Abbott wants to put an SB 4 bill into place. CNN's Laura Agori reports.
Texas is in a legal tug of war. Governor Greg Abbott wants to start enforcing SB 4, the state's new immigration law that he signed last year. It empowers state and local law enforcement to detain people they suspect of entering the U.S. illegally. But it's facing a myriad of legal challenges from the Biden administration and other groups. And while those court battles play out, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a temporary order Tuesday allowing Texas to enforce SB 4. But hours later, a federal appeals court slammed the brakes on that, and the governor pushed back Wednesday.
Texas has a right to defend ourselves, and we will use that authority to declare an invasion and fight back against that invasion.
No SB 4! SB 4 has sparked protests, and critics say it greenlights racial profiling. After Tuesday's legal maneuvering, some cities moved quickly to allay those fears.
We don't want our deputies making arrests unless somebody has actually committed a crime.
It can be just by seeing somebody and the officer thinking that he's not from here and then asking for documents. It doesn't work like that.
But exactly how it will work is now back in the hands of the 5th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, for now, with the governor, the state, and the eyes of the nation watching.
What Texas is doing on immigration would be akin to them declaring their own wars, would create massive confusion across not just Texas, but other states.
I'm Laura Aguirre reporting.
Dr. Canervo, could you give us a brief overview about how a bill like this could affect immigration in Texas?
Well, what SB 4 is intended to do is to allow the state of Texas and their law enforcement officials to enforce immigration law, and specifically to approach people who are in Texas who may have entered illegally, and to stop them and to question them. One of the fears then is that people will be picked on as possible illegal immigrants simply because of their appearance, because they are Hispanic, without any other cause to stop them, to question them. What's going to happen is that law enforcement officials then would have the right to stop a Hispanic person on the street, ask for papers, ask for documentation that they are legal and deserve to be there, which is a real problem, because it's questioning people who are very legal in their status, who have perhaps been here years, who may already be citizens, but because of the way they look, they're going to be perhaps put upon by law enforcement officials. And that's not what the United States is known for, or should be known for, is that kind of on-the-street questioning of who we are as citizens and visitors to a country.
Definitely. It is concerning where the line may be drawn between reasonable suspicion and profiling.
That's right.
And that is something that I think we as a country need to be very careful about moving forward, because of the type of precedent that a bill like this, if it leans towards profiling, what that would mean.
Right. And we do some profiling already for law enforcement purposes, for better or for worse, sometimes for worse, certainly. And so this is a real question. Now, the Texas police, at least the ones I've seen interviewed, are saying they don't really have the number of people necessary to engage in their normal law enforcement activities, and at the same time pick up this extra responsibility as well. And so at least some of the law enforcement officials who've been interviewed have said they're not going to do it, that they simply don't have the ability to handle that extra responsibility. Now what's going to happen, of course, is that we're going to have police officers stationed at the borders. The governor, Abbott, is saying that the federal government is not undertaking its responsibility of handling immigration properly. And so what is happening is that, as they say, Texas is being invaded. And so that's where we are. Invasions, the states are allowed to protect against, but normal immigration, they're not.
Exactly. We'll have to wait and see whether or not this bill is going to move forward and how that will affect Texas and other conservative states in the U.S. But after this short break, we'll be back to discuss what's going on with Georgia's healthcare system.
As you progress in your semester, you might find your workload becoming overwhelming. The Learning Resource Center is a great asset we have here on campus that is always here to help. Located in the Marks Building, room 124, the center aims to help you succeed in any area of study with one-on-one peer tutoring and so much more. Come by and see them or contact them for more information at 221-6550. That's 221-6550, a campus reminder from APSU-TV.
A new Medicaid bill in Georgia was just recently rejected. How could this affect Georgia's healthcare system and people who have been struggling to get access to healthcare?
Well, the legislation dealt with what's called Medicaid expansion. And it's to provide poor people who are on Medicaid and Medicare as well with additional coverage under the federal government's Medicare and Medicaid programs. This was the same sort of proposal that was rejected in Tennessee. Tennessee had proposals to expand Medicare and Medicaid to additional people, and the legislature here in Tennessee rejected it. Georgia has done the same thing. What happened in Tennessee was that many people went without medical attention who were poor, and also many of the rural hospitals found themselves closing because they simply didn't have the patients and the money that the Medicaid expansion would have brought. And I would suspect the same thing is going to happen in Georgia, that the rural hospitals there will find themselves running out of money, and that with their closing, it's going to provide that much more of a burden on poorer people in the state to get medical care.
Definitely. A veteran in Georgia specifically spoke with CNN discussing how, how he's unable to have health care insurance due to his circumstances, and that prevents him from seeking the proper medical attention he needs for injuries. And that's just one person's story in Georgia who was hoping that this Medicaid expansion bill would go through. So it is unfortunate in that sense. I do wonder why a bill like this would be rejected.
It's going to be rejected probably for the same reason it was in Tennessee, and that is Tennessee was afraid that over time the federal government would require Tennessee, or in this case Georgia, to pick up more and more of the cost. And so they're worried about the cost. Now, if Georgia has some sort of compensatory program that will take care of the poor people in place of Medicaid, that would be fine. But there's no evidence that, in fact, that's the case, as is true in Tennessee.
That's definitely something to consider, especially if some of the politicians in Georgia still want to try and push for this bill in the future, a compromise, as you mentioned before. But that's all the time that we have for today. Thanks for joining us, and make sure to tune in again in a couple of weeks.